Okay, let's dive right into this and tackle what is absolutely the biggest pain point every focused PMP learner faces. We're talking about memorizing hundreds upon hundreds of terms from a massive 69-page glossary. It's daunting, it's dense, and honestly, trying to read that thing from A to Z, well, that's just a recipe for instant burnout. So, if you're sitting there feeling totally overwhelmed by the sheer volume of terminology in front of you, just take a deep breath. In this explainer, we're going to sift through all that noise and get straight to the signal. Our entire goal today is to focus exclusively on the PMP vocabulary that appears again and again in the exam.
Think of it like a giant puzzle. We're building your PMP knowledge by breaking down the exact vocabulary you actually need, piece by piece. We want to help you construct a really solid foundation without getting completely lost in the weeds.
To pull this off, we're actually going to use a highly tested PMP concept right out of the gate, the 80-20 rule. You might know it as Pareto analysis. This principle states that 80% of your effects come from just 20% of your causes. So for our purposes, we are going to focus intensely on that 20% of glossary terms that will yield 80% of your exam success. It's all about working smarter, not harder, right?
To drastically lower your cognitive load, we're abandoning the traditional alphabetical format. Instead, we're grouping these terms into distinct buckets. We've got cracking the PMP code, the traditional waterfall world, the agile and adaptive mindset, navigating the human element, managing risk and quality, and finally, final exam prep takeaways.
Let's start with our very first bucket, Section 2, the traditional waterfall world, focusing on predictive project management.
In this predictive world, life cycles are completed in a very distinct linear fashion, where all the value is delivered at the very end of the project. And the work breakdown structure, or WBS, is totally foundational here. It's the hierarchical decomposition of the total scope of work. But here is the absolutely crucial point you must remember for the exam, the 100% rule. This rule mandates that a WBS has to capture absolutely all known scope and deliverables. Literally, if it is not in the WBS, it is simply not part of the project.
Another heavy hitter in this domain is the critical path method, or CPM. Now, this concept trips a lot of people up because it sounds a bit contradictory. The critical path is the sequence of activities representing the longest path through a project. But mathematically, this longest path determines the absolute shortest possible time you can complete the project. You literally cannot finish any faster than your critical path allows.
Now let's look at your two main options for schedule compression when you're falling behind. Crashing means throwing more resources at tasks, like paying for overtime, which, as you'd expect, invariably increases your cost. Fast tracking, on the other hand, means taking tasks you'd normally do in sequence and overlapping them in parallel. This doesn't necessarily cost more money, but it dramatically increases your risk. So remember, cost versus risk, that's the key distinction.
Okay, let's flip the coin and move into Section 3, the agile and adaptive mindset, where it's all about responding to change. Over here, the entire philosophy shifts to delivering maximum value to the customer over following a rigid plan. The big takeaway is contrasting these two core approaches. As we just saw, the predictive lifecycle determines scope early and moves in a single pass. But the adaptive lifecycle, it uses iterative and incremental approaches to continuously refine work items and deliver functional value frequently. It's completely geared toward adapting to unknowns. In an adaptive framework like Scrum, all the work happens in short time boxes called sprints. Let's look at how a sprint cycle flows, starting with sprint planning. This is a highly collaborative event where the team clarifies the details of the backlog items, defines the acceptance criteria, and explicitly sets the work commitment for the upcoming iteration.
Once that sprint kicks off, the team aligns through the daily stand-up. This is a fast-paced synchronization meeting, and it is strictly time-boxed to just 15 minutes. The team gets together to address three specific things: what they did yesterday, what they intend to do today, and identifying any impediments or obstacles that are blocking their path.
And the cycle always concludes with a sprint retrospective. Now, do not confuse this with a sprint review or a demo. The retrospective is dedicated entirely to continuous process improvement. The team sits down to analyze what worked well, what didn't, and they agree upon specific changes to implement in the very next sprint.
Next up, we dive into Section 4, Navigating the Human Element, which covers people and communications.
This is a massive area that gets heavily emphasized on the modern exam because dealing with people and communication is where projects most often succeed or fail in the real world. A huge term you'll encounter is servant leadership. It's the core leadership style in agile environments, and it basically means turning the traditional corporate hierarchy upside down. Your primary job as a leader is to act as a shield and a bulldozer. You need to understand your team's needs, develop their skills, and clear out obstacles so they can achieve the highest possible performance.
When a team is trying to reach a consensus, you're going to see these group decision techniques pop up on the exam all the time. Unanimity means everyone entirely agrees. Majority means more than a half agree. Plurality is when the largest block in a group decides, even if it falls short of a true majority. And dictatorship? Well, that's simply one single person making the call for everybody.
Now, here's a spot where the exam absolutely loves to trick test takers. Communication types. Remember this distinction. Push communication means you are actively sending information directly to specific people, kind of like an email blast or handing out a memo. Pull communication, however, requires the interested parties to go and access the information on their own initiative, like logging into a SharePoint site or an e-learning platform.
That brings us to Section 5, Managing Risk and Quality. These are the watchdogs of your project.
Think of these constraints as protecting your project's baseline. If a negative risk or threat arises, you have 4 highly tested official responses. You can avoid it entirely by just changing your plan. You can mitigate it by taking action to reduce its probability or impact. You can transfer the liability to a third party, like buying insurance. Or if the impact is low enough, you can simply accept it, acknowledging the risk is there without taking proactive action.
When calculating the cost of quality, you're always weighing 2 distinct things. Conformance represents the proactive costs of preventing poor quality. Think of things like training, buying high-quality materials, and the time spent just doing it right the first time. You are comparing that against the cost of nonconformance, which are the incredibly painful, reactive costs of failures. We're talking internal rework, scrapped materials, warranty liabilities, and lost business.
Finally, when you're dealing with extreme schedule or cost uncertainty, Monte Carlo analysis is the key simulation technique you need to know. This is where a computer rapidly calculates the probable total costs and completion dates across hundreds or even thousands of different what-if scenarios. It gives you a highly realistic probability curve for your project's success.
And finally, Section 6, Final Exam Prep Takeaways. Let's lock this all in. By organizing this massive, intimidating glossary into these targeted buckets, waterfall, agile, people, and risk, you've drastically reduced the noise. You now have a powerful, organized mental schema to rapidly decode that PMP vocabulary that appears again and again on the exam.
As you continue your focused study sessions, I want you to ask yourself honestly, which of these specific domain buckets still feels like your weakest link? Are you struggling more with the rigid rules of waterfall or the fluid, changing dynamics of agile? Pinpoint that exact weakness today, because once you know where you're vulnerable, what's stopping you from completely crushing this exam?